why did it have to be flying snakes? Because they are fascinating. What are the zoological implications of a flying snake? Does it have wings? Does it have legs? Well, sometimes. Does that make it not a snake? Who knows? Is it an animal, or more specifically human? Or a bit of both? Again, one will often find that it depends on the individual myth, even more specifically than the culture and time. The difference between the looks that various cultures give to serpents, it's a bit of a modern curveball towards the rest of the world that there is animosity pointed towards snakes that stems from, mainly, the Christian mythology or religion. This, if even subconsciously, continues to influence the perception of snakes. But there are so many more examples of strength and wisdom. And sure, snakes are dangerous. They can hurt us. But just like broad bouncers at clubs, that also makes them ideal protectors. To be clear, these are not dragons. I'm not discussing Yanti or all the varieties of Naga or all the individual names of the lower body of snake, the upper body of human individuals from various mythologies. Neither am I talking about world serpents, the cyclical tail-biting serpents, mythological serpent monsters, or even just mythical or folkloric snakes. I've decided to narrow my focus to snakes with feathers or plumage, which includes snakes with wings. While there are many examples representing the formers from all over the world, I tried to investigate how universal the plumed or feathered serpent idea has been. And, well, it hasn't. Well, not completely. Many snake deities appear all over the world, and many of them are connectors or lords of the underworld, or they can fly. But they aren't always depicted with feathers, which kind of gets to a gray area when they're said they have wings. And some are not really described at all, so even if they can fly, there's no guarantee. Hello everyone, my name is Renee. You're listening to episode 14 of Detours in Archaeology. This is Take Me to Snurch. The first example is the Quetztalcoatl from Dungeons and Dragons. The Quetztalcoatl is a medium-sized lawful good celestial and are divine caretakers said to be the guardians created by a benevolent god at the beginning of time. This being, along with the majority of Dungeons and Dragons gods and monsters, were and continue to be inspired by the characters of the ancient world. Starting with this modern take on a snake-like creature may be the first step for many people into the mythological figures. While this can be detrimental due to a skewed image of how this being was supposed to be, Tiamat is a very good example of this, although she is not a serpent. Whoever the writer is for this divine being got a decent amount in line with the consensus of how this deity would have acted. Of course, in mythology, there is typically one, not a species. And also, typically, on the stoneworking and paintings depicting one of the gods of creation, they aren't actually shown with wings, just feathers or plumage over their entire body. In the image from the monster manual, you can see how awesome it looks, and artistic license is completely beneficial. I can't and I won't speak for the artist. So I just wonder if they also pulled inspiration to add the wings based on the cobra goddess Wadjet, when combined with the vulture goddess Nekhbet, the snake with bird wings. Either way, I'm completely pro this Dungeons & Dragons deity creature that shows these unordinary chimera creatures in a positive light. Speaking of the monster manual, it is a fictional medieval bestiary, while from real medieval bestiary volumes we have most wyvern creatures with the pair of hind legs and wings, as you've either seen in Lord of the Rings as the Witch King's steed, And in the medieval bestiaries, there is the amphispana, a two-headed lizard or serpent that has one head at the front and another at the end of its tail, allowing it to move in both directions. Gaius Julius Solis and Isidore of Seville observed that when both heads try to lead, it moves in circles, dragging its body behind. Both heads eat fish and share food with the body. It usually appears as a wyvern-like creature with wings, 2 feet, horns, and the second head on its tail. Another is the aspis. It's described as a snake that avoids magic by pressing one ear to the ground and covering the other ear with its tail. It is often shown with wings and also has 2 legs. In medieval art, a man is hitting the asp or aspis with a stick while it breathes fire. A third is the boa. Rather than just being a snake, it is another wyvern creature with wings and 2 legs. And in the bestiaries, it is seen sucking milk from a cow's udder, but taking so much that the cow dies. The jaculus is yet another example of a wyvern-like creature with wings and 2 legs, and it is described as a flying snake that waits in trees for an animal to pass and then drops down to catch it and kill it. The chitalis, another example of a wyvern-like creature, it also has wings and 2 legs, is described as a snake with an appearance that would stun the viewer, but it looks more chimerical. The serpens is not just a serpent, as the name might suggest. While it's described as crawling using their scales, it is shown with legs and wings. These and other flying snakes in medieval bestiaries tend to have legs or are a complete chimera, but if we narrow the field to only wings on a snake, we have the siren. It is described as a winged white snake by Isidore of Seville, who mentions that in Arabia, these winged snakes whose bite causes death before any pain starts, they're described by Thomas of Canterbury as signifying those who are conscious of sin and remorse, even when they commit the sins, yet they're so miserable and weak that they allow themselves to be overcome by temptation. But moving to the Olmec, retracing the myth back to what is understood by historians to be the first example of this god, at least in the Americas, from the Olmeca. Some of the earliest representations of feathered serpents in Mesoamerica appear in the Olmec culture, dating to around 1500 to 400 BCE. During the formative period, in caves in the state of Guerrero, Mexico, murals linked to the Olmec motifs and iconography were painted. This wide-sweeping cultural touchstone extended from the Gulf of Mexico to Nicaragua, likely thanks in part to the expansive trade routes built on high-value materials such as greenstone, shell, and obsidian. Most surviving representations in Olmec art, such as the painting in the Huaswalaka cave, show the feathered serpent as a crested rattlesnake, sometimes with feathers covering the head, the body, and sometimes including legs, and often close to human-like, like in Monument 19 at La Venta, which is dated to either 1200 or 1000 to 400 BCE. It is believed that entities such as the feathered serpent were the forerunners of many later Mesoamerican deities, because the Olmec culture predates the Maya, the Mixtecs, and all other cultures in this area. Although experts do disagree on the feathered serpent's religious importance to the Olmec due to the lack of lasting documentation, such as the Popol Vuh, which records the Mayan culture. H.B. Nielsen notes that as early as the Middle Formative, the Preclassic, in the Olmec tradition, images of serpents with avian characteristics were often represented in several types of artifacts and monuments. This composite creature, a chimera, has also been called the avian serpent and Olmec God 7, and appears to constitute an earlier form of the later fully fledged feathered serpent. The rattlesnake covered with feathers, perhaps with at least some of the same celestial and fertility connotations as in later documented myths. An overlapping and slightly later dating site in south-central Mexico is the gridded city-state of Teotihuacan, circa 200 BCE to 700 CE, also features the feathered serpent, shown most prominently on the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, built 150 to 200 CE. On the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, the serpent itself is the prominent form, with the body appearing to be swimming in the water as depicted by the shells, and on its tail just before the rattle is wearing a mask, which has been suggested to represent either Tlaloc, the human and snake-like god of rain, a war serpent, as claimed by Mary Ellen Miller and Carl Taub, or that the mask represents the fire serpent, wearing a headdress with the Teotihuacan symbol for war, as claimed by Michael D. Coe. It is also thought by some that in the eyes of the figures there is a spot for obsidian glass to be put in. This can further connect these serpent depictions to the Olmec culture and trade for their version of the god itself. In the region from Chichen Itza down to the Guatemalan highlands, the feathered serpent god got a different name. In the Yucatec Maya tradition, the name is Cuculcan. In Quiche Maya, it's Cuculmatz. But no matter what the spelling, these different names are believed to represent the same flying serpent god as in all parts of the multi-regional cult. According to Miller and Taub, Cuculcan was rare in the classic Maya civilization, but in the Quiche Popol Vuh, Cuculmatz, the god associated with water, clouds, the wind, and the sky, teamed up with Tepo, the god of lightning and fire, and were the duo of gods that created humanity. While Cuculmatz may have originally been the same god as Tohil, the Quiche sun god, who also had attributes of the feathered serpent, they seemed later to have diverged. This also played a role in the ball game myth with the hero twins, and thus has shown up on ball courts as markers. Cuculmatz's main job was to carry the sun across the sky and down into the underworld, and thus acted as a mediator between the various powers in the Maya cosmos. A few examples of this deity are also found across the Mayan world. In Yaxchilan, as the vision serpent, shown on the details of lintel 15 and depicted on its pillars. Another example is the flying serpent atop the world tree in Palenque that I've discussed in my second episode on the coffin lid. A war serpent, or Waxaclacun Ubacan, was another one of the names for the Classic Period's version of Cuculcan, which extended past the Classic Period into the Post-Classic and out of the initial Maya area. Another example from after the main part of the Classic Period is from Labna, a palace site built in the late and terminal Classic periods that has, according to Ivanov in 1973, serpents adorning the corners of the principal facade. And characteristic of the vision serpent, there appears to be either an anthropomorphic deity or the spirit of an ancestor from the jaws of the serpent's mouth. In the post-Classic period, the gods following continue to be found in the Guatemalan highlands. On one of the buildings of Uxmal in the Nunnery Quadrangle, the flying serpent is built into the lattice design. From the terminal Classic and post-Classic onwards, the balance of power shifted over time, and the ruling powers moved north and built Mayapan and Chichen Itza, two more examples of sites in the late post-Classic that were built in the state of Yucatan, Mexico. One name that more people might recognize, Quetzalcoatl, even though I was taught that it was pronounced Quetzalcoatl. The name in part means Quetzali, or beautiful, like the Quetzal bird, and Coatl, meaning snake or serpent. He was also a human king, but like in the Mayan tradition, Quetzalcoatl was also the god. Although he was at one point described as a human king, most of the time he is just described as the god, and like in the Mayan tradition, he was the god of the wind and the sky and part of the quartet of gods who created different versions of the world and brought humanity to what is now in the time of the fifth sun. He stood for, or was related to, gods of the wind, of the planet Venus, and of the dawn, as well as being a patron of merchants and arts, crafts, learning, and knowledge. The cobra goddess of ancient Egypt, Wadjet, means green one. The name has many spellings because of changes in pronunciation over time and in location, and many vowels were not recorded in hieroglyphic texts. In Greek, she was also known as Buto, Uto, or Edjo, and because of similarities between myths, was likely compared to the Greek story of Leto and Apollo on Delos. In early periods before unification, she was the patron of the goddess of the city of Dep, and while she was also a city goddess in Upper Egypt, she was also the major goddess of all of Lower Egypt. And upon unification, she became the joint protector of the pharaoh of all of Egypt along with Nekhbet. While she is sometimes depicted as a snake-headed woman, she is also shown as just a snake. Wadjet is the rearing cobra shown on the crown of the pharaohs. Wadjet had a large temple at the ancient Emet, now Tel Nebesha, in the Nile Delta. She was worshipped in the area as the Lady of Emet, and she was later joined by Min and Horus to form a triad of deities. In addition to being the protector and guardian of kings, she was also the protector of women in childbirth, because in some myths, Wadjet was said to be the nurse of the infant god Horus. With the help of his mother Isis, they protected Horus from his evil uncle Set while they were taking refuge in the swamps of the Nile Delta. She was also an extremely powerful goddess whose gaze was said to slaughter enemies. Wadjet and Nekhbet, the vulture goddess of Upper Egypt, were the protective goddesses of the king and were sometimes represented together on the king's diadem, symbolizing his reign over all of Egypt. The form of the rearing cobra on the crown is now termed the uraeus, which was originally the emblem on the crown of the rulers of Lower Egypt. Nekhbet, the vulture, is an early pre-dynastic local god in Egypt mythology, who is the patron of the city of Nekheb. Ultimately, she became the patron of Upper Egypt and joined Wadjet as the patron of all of ancient Egypt after it was unified. And another Greek name for the winged serpent goddess was Nazit, and was also Buto. Renanute is depicted as a cobra or woman with the head of a cobra, as a general snake with a feather of Ma'at on her head. She is the goddess of nourishment and the harvest, so many offerings were presented to her during the annual harvest time. The verbs to fondle, to nurse, or to rear can explain the name Renanute, because this goddess was a nurse who cared for the pharaoh from birth to death. She was also the female counterpart of Shai, who is destiny, who represented the positive destiny of a child. When brought to Greece, she was the Thermouthis and embodied the fertility of the fields and was the protector of the royal office and power. Sometimes as the goddess of fertility and nourishment, Renanute and her sometimes husband Sobek, the crocodile-headed god representing the Nile River, worked together for the annual flooding, which deposited the fertile silt that enabled abundant harvests. The temple of Medine Madi, a small and decorated building in the Fayum, is dedicated to both Sobek and Renanute. When Renanute's husband was Geb in mythology, she was said to be the mother of Nehebkau, who is occasionally also depicted as a snake representing the earth. In later dynastic periods, she was a snake goddess that was worshipped over the whole of Lower Egypt. Over time, Renanute was increasingly associated with Wadjet, and eventually was even identified as an alternate form of Wadjet herself. Meretsiga was the patron of artisans and workers of the village of Dir el Medina, who built and decorated the great royal and noble tombs. Desecrations of rich and royal burials had already been occurring since the Old Kingdom of Egypt, and sometimes often by the workers themselves. Therefore, the genesis of Meretsiga to fulfill the need to identify a guardian goddess as dangerous and merciful of the elite, as are most goddesses. Meretsiga was sometimes also portrayed as a cobra-headed woman, though this iconography was rather rare. And in this case, she could hold a Waz scepter, as well as having her head surmounted by the feather of Ma'at and armed with 2 knives. More commonly, she was depicted as a woman-headed snake or scorpion, or sometimes as a cobra-headed sphinx, a lion-headed cobra, or a 3-headed woman, with the heads of a woman, snake, and a cobra, or a 3-headed woman, snake, and vulture cobra. On various stelas, she wears a modus surmounted by the solar disk and by 2 feathers, or the Hathoric crown, which is the solar disk when in between 2 bovine horns. Some very soft conclusions. Some meanings, which can also go for other mythological snakes and snake-like creatures in general, are wisdom, fertility, for the importance of the earth to remain fertile, protector, guidance, a bridge between our world and the afterlife, like in Ra's journey each night, but those are more snakes than feathered serpents. What I've discussed are a few examples of the magical flying serpent deities from ancient mythologies up to modern day folklore and in pop culture. This is by no means a comprehensive list and is only based on my own limited experience and research into the aspects of the information behind that tattoo I finally got for my 30th birthday after almost a decade of planning. Of course, the tattoo I only really based on Mesoamerican and Egyptian mythologies. There are so many other examples of wisdom bringing serpents from around the world. Some have been and are directly connected to or venerated for the act of endowing knowledge or wisdom to humans, and are seen as being either an ultimately good or conversely evil motivation. Some are deities or representatives of those deities who rule over those particular aspects, but for whatever flexible reason, reach even similar ideas from completely different starting points. Serpents seem to have a valuable place in human culture, and in the disconnected majority, as guardians, protectors, providers of wisdom, and connectors between our world and the world beyond. And thus, serpents seem to have a very valuable place in human culture. Wisdom is constant growth by looking outside oneself and asking, how can I improve? How much do I not know? It's an ongoing battle between multiple worlds of competing advice that can only be answered by understanding and the realization that there is more to learn. Listening and discussing topics and being open to change and different ideas and values that don't need to be followed in certain cases, but they can lead to new ideas and adventures never had. In spiritual context, we can acknowledge a belief that this balance is a gift between our lives here on earth and some divine imagination of the heavens, a gift from any specific deity who saw humans as having great potential. Wisdom is working with cognizant thoughts, which can give us hope or anxiety on any given day, letting us reason that just because a tomato is fruit doesn't mean necessarily that it belongs in a smoothie, even though vegetables are regularly added and taste delicious. As these two worlds are brought together through reasoning out in the world around us with wisdom, it's logical that most, if not all cultures, create such deities to be connected to the heavens and to earth, and be willing and even wanting to share the wisdom with others. These are ideas that I want to remind myself of every day, so I put it permanently on my arm. Many more deities and representations take on a serpentine form and follow different paths in their divinity, but this is about those that inspired me. Because I've left this podcast at the more direct inspirations for my tattoo design, I have allocated some of the multitude of other examples of the flying serpent deities around the world to the next podcast. So tune back in a couple weeks for more snakes and hopefully more wisdom that you can share with others. I want to thank you very much for listening to Take Me to Snurch, the bringers of divine serpent wisdom and inspiration. Whether you've heard my episodes before, or if this one is your first, I truly appreciate your time and interest. I would like to apologize for any names or pronunciations I get wrong. I do make hearty attempts, but of course I make mistakes. I really want to learn, so please, if you have any comments, corrections, any questions, Or if you have an idea of something for me to delve into, you can comment directly on whatever podcast app you're listening to. Email me directly at detoursandarchaeology@gmail.com, or head over to my website at detoursandarchaeology.com and go to the contact page. I'd especially like to thank my Patreon supporters. If you'd like to join them, head over to my channel's page at patreon.com/detoursandarchaeology, where you can sign up. You get extra goodies every week, like bloopers or photo blogs that are not on my Instagram. You can follow me on Instagram to catch the latest photos at Flying Sepida. Sepida is spelled Sepiida. It is the family name for cuttlefish without the E at the end. And don't forget to sign up for email notifications at my website after you read a bunch of different articles. Every Wednesday, I have either an article or one of my personal illustrations posted, which you can get for yourself at the second level on Patreon. Another way, arguably the best way to support the podcast, at least for right now, is to subscribe, rate, and review, as this can help it reach a wider audience and kind of get the word out to the general public, and maybe inspire some new people. All the music used was by Scott Buckley, who you can find at scottbuckley.com.au. As Labor Day has now passed and the summer season is almost over, the fun fact this week will be about the dog days of summer. Nowadays, it refers to a specific time in the 19th century that was associated with intense heat and its dangers, particularly in the urban environments like New York. But this term is rooted in ancient Roman beliefs that linked the star and constellation of Sirius with the summer heat and canine madness. The reason that it was so common to say the dog days of summer as the hottest days is because in the time of ancient Greece and Rome, the constellation Sirius, Canis Major, or the dog star, used to rise during the hottest days of summer in August. It is also believed that during that time, there was a fear of the spread of rabies, which was thought to be the combined influence of the heat and the rising of Sirius. This led to significant changes in how dogs were treated, including muzzling, impoundment, and even death. The English name is a phrase of the Latin dies canicularis, which literally means the puppy days. Also known as the dog star, the last name reflects the way Sirius follows the constellation Orion into the night sky. It was also connected to sudden thunderstorms, lethargy, fever, mad dogs, and bad luck. And this doesn't only affect the northern hemisphere summer either. In the southern hemisphere, the dog star will rise in December, their middle of summer. So it can still be the hottest time of the year. Though I am unaware of any superstitions as to what the dog star would represent, if it's even seen as a dog. If you know any true fun facts, please share them with me and I'll relay them to everyone who listens, and you'll get your own shout out. I'll see you soon for another detour into archaeology. Thank you once again for listening to the 14th episode. It is coming out on my favorite day of some months, Friday the 13th, because 13 is my favorite number. If you like the show, please show your thanks and support by don't forget to rate and review on Spotify or wherever you're listening, and head over to my website, read the articles, look at all the pictures, and leave a comment, and don't forget to say hi while you're there. Thanks again.